Previously on the history and evolution of Dragon Ball games.
The game focused on online team play, and despite the mixed reception, it wouldn't be the last time that we would see this concept in a Dragon Ball game.
We jump forward in time. Another generation of consoles goes by, not just the home consoles but the handheld as well. Welcome to the 3DS era. In the West, the 3DS is mostly known for two Dragon Ball games, Extreme Butoden and Fusions. Extreme Butoden came out first, developed by a Bandai Namco studio with graphics and general art done by Arc System Works, who had worked with them previously on Supersonic Warriors. Arc Systems was well established as a fighting game developer at this point, being successful with their Guilty Gear and Blaze Blue series. And that's exactly what they came here to do in the 3DS. They came to work on a traditional fighting game. Sure, they only worked on the visuals, but that's part of what was so good about their games. They had really impressive visuals in addition to a cool fighting system in place. So Extreme Butoden is still to this day heavily associated with Arc System Works, despite most of the work having been done by an inside studio at Bandai Namco. Fusions, on the other hand, was more of an RPG. You could create your own character, free roam the world, do some exploration, and then you had this semi-active battle system that was actually quite interesting. It tells an original story in a different dimension, and just like you would expect from the title, it featured a lot of fusions. Fusions from the anime, fusions from the manga, and also new original fusions. It even had a 5-way fusion mechanic invented by the Ginyu Force that the player could perform as well at some point in the game. So you would be able to fuse with 4 other characters for something called an Ultra Fusion, and that was an exciting concept. But in Japan, there was another series that was actually more popular. The Data Card-esque games were finally leaving the arcades with their latest game, Dragon Ball Heroes. They brought the series over to the 3DS. First up was Dragon Ball Heroes Ultimate Mission. The arcade game was recreated in the 3DS. Players would use decks of virtual cards for battles. With the bottom screen, you would arrange and play the game, while the top screen displayed attack animations. The game featured almost 1,000 virtual cards, which is basically different characters or different versions of the same characters, stuff like that. And of course, the big feature that drew people in was still present. The original story, the original animation, with original characters, as well as alternate versions for the characters that we know and love. Ultimate Mission 2 improved the graphics and the amount of content, with more than 2,000 cards available, more than doubling the amount of the previous game. And then Ultimate Mission X did precisely the same, improved graphics once again, and included more than 3,000 cards. And Ultimate Mission X seems lined up to be the last Dragon Ball game for the 3DS. By the time this game came out, Nintendo had already launched the Switch a month prior, and everything seems to point that that's where Dragon Ball games are going to live in the future. But nevertheless, this series that started as a trading card game on the arcades is now closing Nintendo's popular handheld console, and we might not have seen the end of it yet. Speaking of arcades, I remember saying we closed that chapter.
And having closed the book on the PSP, Nintendo DS, and the Wii, it's time to wrap up another platform, the arcades.
Well, technically Zenkai Battle was sort of re-released in 2015, and that really was the last game on arcades so far. But in 2014, there was another one, Dragon Ball Discross. And I'm not even gonna talk about this one for too long because it's just a bad game. You buy discs, you put the discs in the machine, and then you tap the button as fast as you can, and then the game decides whether you win or lose. Let's just move on. This was also the time when mobile games were booming, and Bandai wasn't gonna let that market go without some Dragon Ball games. They went in pretty heavy on this. It all started with Dragon Ball Tap Battle, a real-time fighting game where you would tap the screen to move, charge, attack, pretty much everything. You could even play multiplayer if you were close to someone else who won the game. Then came Dragon Ball RPG Shōnen-hen, which, judging from the title, you might have guessed, yes, it's an RPG. A very traditional RPG actually, something not very common in mobile games. It was pretty similar to Attack of the Saiyans, the game developed by Monolith for the Nintendo DS. Dragon Ball Ultimate Swipe brought back the real-time action combat, but this time from a first-person perspective, and it gave me weird Dragon Ball Connect flashbacks. But it wouldn't be until 2015 that Bandai would hit absolute gold with a mobile game. They did it with Dragon Ball Z Dokkan Battle. The game is still updated, still popular, still played to this day. 3 years after release, not many games can claim that. In this game, you assemble your own custom team of characters using cards, a system very similar to Dragon Dragon Ball heroes, and that's really the big appeal. Unlocking new characters, leveling them up, making your dream team, because the battles themselves are popping bubbles. It doesn't look very exciting. I agree, it's not very exciting, but there is some strategy to it, even if it's not a very Dragon Ball-like system. Then we had Dragon and the Incredible Adventures on iOS, known as Kamehameha on Android. This game is a mystery to me. There's barely any advertising for the game. I had never heard of it until I made this video. I'm not even sure if it's an official Bandai Namco game, but it seems to have come out in 2017. It's a turn-based battle game with over 200 characters that you can pick and make your own team, similar to Dokkan Battle in that way, and it also seems to have updates and events happening regularly. But it has a very different fighting system. It's got this turn-based thing like I mentioned. And finally, let's talk about Dragon Ball Legends. The game brings mobile Dragon Ball games back to action fighting, this time with a behind-the-back camera. You still have a card system where you unlock abilities and new characters, so it retains that successful mechanic from Dokkan Battle, but promises a more exciting fighting system. Not only can you play through story mode, you can also play PvP against other players, online, anywhere on the globe, and in real time. At the time of making this video, the game has not been released yet, but already has over 2 million players wanting to participate in beta tests. So you can already tell, it's gonna be huge. It might even be the biggest Dragon Ball mobile game to date. On the home console side of things, coming from a largely disappointing generation, we transition to a much more exciting one, with new concepts for Dragon Ball games, or at least evolutions of previous concepts done in a very meaningful way. Dragon Ball Xenoverse was the transitional title. After Battle of Z, Xenoverse actually used a similar but more polished combat system. It came out for the previous generation and the current generation of consoles simultaneously, and it was also the first Dragon Ball game coming out on the PC, if you don't count Dragon Ball Online, which, let's be real, not a lot of people count Dragon Ball Online. And despite it being the third Dragon Ball game featuring character creation, it was the first one to do so by giving players a large amount of options, so in many ways, it still feels like the first game to actually pull it off. Dragon Ball Xenoverse was incredibly significant in the history of Dragon Ball games. It had its flaws, for sure, repetitive missions, lag in team battles, but character creation paired up with being able to play online with your friends, and a whole new community of players being able to enjoy a Dragon Ball game on their PCs, launched Xenoverse to new heights. It became one of the best-selling Dragon Ball games of all time, right up there alongside the first Butoden, which, funny enough, was another game developed by Dimps. So Dimps is pretty much confirmed to be the best seller when it comes to Dragon Ball games. Obviously, they had to make a sequel, and it came out fast. Only a year and a half later, Xenoverse 2 was out. The game was heavily criticized for being very similar to the previous game, but as time went by, the community gained a different appreciation for it. Xenoverse 2 was bigger than the first Xenoverse. It made a lot of quality of life adjustments. It added abilities, transformations, outfits. It even came out later on the Nintendo Switch. But more importantly, it was built to be supported over time. Regular updates, regular events, regular DLC, the game was built to last way more than a year. So as the people who only saw it as the copy of the first Xenoverse stopped playing and left the game, it continued to thrive with the community who stuck with it. There are rumors of a Xenoverse 3 already in development, but for now, Xenoverse 2 is still generally loved by Dragon Ball fans. What came after Xenoverse 2 was actually a completely different breed of game. After working on the visuals of Super Sonic Warriors 2 and Extreme Butoden, Bandai Namco finally gave Arc System Works permission to fully develop a game. Coming from their anime fighting games background, they took that formula that had found success within the fighting games community and gave it a Dragon Ball coating. The result was Dragon Ball FighterZ. At first glance, this game is the best of both worlds. Great fighting game mechanics from a veteran developer, merged with beautiful Dragon Ball graphics and over-the-top animation. But the community was actually very split on this title. Fighting game fans loved it, of course, but a lot of Dragon Ball fans struggled to understand the appeal. For a fighting game fan, the quality of the game is extremely obvious, but for a casual Dragon Ball fan, this was a backward step. Story mode wasn't that exciting, it was lacking in content. We went from 3D games to a 2.5D, from hundreds of characters to a roster just over 20 characters. So just like Xenoverse, FighterZ ended up finding its own community. Those who disliked it dropped it, and those who liked it stuck with it. As the game continues to receive updates with new features, new characters, and continues to grow within the fighting games community, as it claims the #1 spot on EVO 2018 with the highest number of signups for the tournament. So where do we go from here? The mobile games market continues to be huge, so surely we haven't seen the last Dragon Ball game on that platform, even after Dragon Ball Legends. And as far as home consoles go, I believe that every year we'll see less and less Dragon Ball games. Not because the games are not popular or anything, but because games themselves have evolved to work as a service nowadays, to be supported for a long time after release. We've already seen that happen with Xenoverse, and we're seeing that happen with FighterZ right now. I'm sure these are not the last Dragon Ball games this generation has seen, but the times of 5 Dragon Ball games per year are now far behind us. Whatever the future holds, I believe the series will continue to have its ups and downs, and we'll be here to let them know when we dislike something. But for us living in the present, I'd say it's a pretty damn good time to be a fan of Dragon Ball games.